Welcome back. In this note, we're going to talk about zeros and multiplicities of polynomials. So all the polynomials today are going to be given to you in factored form. And the nice thing about factored form is you can very easily see the zeros. So remember here, to find the zeros using the zero product property, you take both parentheses to set equal to 0, and then solve. So for this one, your two solutions are going to be 3 and -4. Those are going to be your zeros. Here, you'll get an x of -2 being your 0. Here, you have to subtract the 3 and then divide by 2 to get a 0 of -3/2. But recall, that's how you use the zero product property in order to find zeros when you have something that's already factored. Now, the big idea of this is when you're dealing with higher power polynomials, sometimes these can have what are called a multiplicity. A multiplicity is if the factor has a degree on it. So, you're going to start your problem exactly the same. You take both parentheses, set them equal to 0. So you have a solution of x equals -1 and a solution of x equals 6. So you have a 0 of -1 and a 0 of 6 with multiplicity 2. Now what I mean by that is notice this 2 that was on that factor. Okay, so whenever the factor itself has an exponent, when you're stating the zeros, you have to state that multiplicity. So 0, -1, and 0 of 6 with a multiplicity of 2 because that factor was originally squared. So let's take a look at this. So remember, if you have an x out front by itself, that just represents x being 0, okay? So don't forget that little detail too, is when you just have x out front with no pluses or minuses, it just means x is 0. Then x plus 4 equals 0, x plus 7 equals 0. So here we already have that one solved. X equals -4, x equals -7. And what you need to write is you have a 0 of 0, 0 of -4. This has a multiplicity 2 because you can see that factor was squared. You also have a 0 of -7 with a multiplicity of 3 because that factor was being cubed. It had a third power on it. So again, just a big thing about all of these is making sure you write that multiplicity down. So let's do one more example before we end our notes. So I take each parenthesis, set it equal to 0. So here I'm going to have to add my 5 over and then divide by 2. Here I just have to subtract the 3 over. So my two solutions, I have a 0 of 5/2 and it has a multiplicity of 3. I have a 0 of -3 with multiplicity 2. So again, just use a zero product property. Only new thing here is using those multiplicities when you see that there are exponents on the factors. So as always, thank you for joining me. Make sure you have all this written down and come see me if you have any questions.